Tokyo, my friends. This is Daisuke, and I hope all of you are doing very well today. I'd like to answer a question that I received in relation to some other questions that I had received earlier about the kinds of books that I like to read. Now, one of the questions that I received was, do I read the book first before watching the film adaptation of that book? As you know, of course, books provide a great resource for filmmakers to create works of art in the medium of film. This has gone on for as long as I can think, so we see this going on a lot. And it's not true just of works of literature into film. We also see this interplay go on with literature and music and literature in the theater, etc., and vice versa as well. So this relationship, of course, between literature and cinema, I think is very prominent, and it happens all the time. So the question, therefore, is, do I read the book first before I watch the film? Now, I think I would have answered the question much differently maybe earlier in my life when I was in college or something. I would have answered, yes, I would try to read the book first. Because I thought at the time that the book was the source material, and therefore the work of art, that is the film adaptation that came later, is the secondary material to that. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but I just mean in terms of the order, the work, the progeny work, so to speak. So it's the secondary material that is derived from the primary source material, that is the work of literature. But you already have this connotation in that description of primary, secondary, derivative work, so to speak. And I know that that's the way it works because that's the order in which these things are developed. I understand that. But already you have this slightly maybe inferiorness, that is the connotation of works of cinema that are adaptations of works of literature. And so I thought about it a lot, actually, as I was growing up. And because while I'm not the greatest reader in the world, and while I'm not the most avid reader, and I'm certainly not the sharpest reader, I'm quite slow when it comes to picking things up from my exploration of works of literature. So, I'm not the best reader in the world, but I think over time, as I've explored more works and I've grown up and gotten older, much older, and I've settled down and maybe gotten a little bit, maybe not that much, but maybe a little bit more experience under my belt, I seem to feel a little bit differently now at this point of time. Now I feel like I don't necessarily have to read the book first. And I'm actually very appreciative of that approach, and it feels to me almost liberating. Now, I feel that way because I think, it's not true all the time, and it's pretty much maybe the default that the film is probably not going to be as good as the book. Now, I know that's usually the case, and that's not because of anything inherently wrong with the actual art of film itself, but I think it usually has to do with the filmmakers involved, the people behind the production, maybe the reasons for adapting in the first place, which are usually commercial. All this stuff I understand, or at least I think I understand, and so therefore I understand the commercial necessity of trying to find works that have been proven, at least in other arenas of literature, to be popular. So if you have a work of literature that's popular, then chances are it'll have the same or similar kind of popularity as a film, perhaps even more so. And so I appreciate that, and I understand the risk involved in spending money and investing. I'm scared just to spend $10 on something, let alone spending whatever it is, $1 million on a film. So I can appreciate the kind of risk that's involved, or not appreciate necessarily, but I can at least generally from a very far vantage point, I'm not totally unsympathetic to that approach. Let me put it that way. So this is, I think, very significant to the concept of adapting books into films, because there's something of a commercial necessity to that. But there is also an artistic component. And I think that is very significant, because not always, but sometimes when the artistic component of that adaptation process is so pronounced, and when it's so profound that it can't be avoided, then that's when I think something magical happens with that film adaptation. And then something happens in that gestating process, and then the production process, that creates something that is independent from the underlying book that it came from. And that's very special, because then what you have is you have two works of art, the book and the film, that operate on their own respective planes. And they can operate in a way that they can coexist without necessarily negating each other out or conflicting with each other. And when that happens, I think that shows me that one does not necessarily have to read the book first before watching the film. One can watch the film first and then read the book. Or maybe one can watch the film only and not read the book. Or maybe one can read the book and not watch the film. I think all the combinations are at play, depending on the type of person you are, the type of schedule that you have, the type of tastes that you have, and that you adopt in your own way of absorbing information and appreciating the world and the environment around you via art. So this is all to say that now I don't feel the need necessarily to read the book first. Maybe if I watch a film and I'm so moved by it, and I'm curious about the work, I will read the book after that. Now, when I was younger, I really hated doing that, because I would always have the film lingering in my mind as I read the book, so I would never be able to read the book on its own terms. I'd always be recalling, like Willy Wonka was, Gene Wilder or something like that. So I would never be able to shake him from my mind when I read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or something. But now I am able to read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, for instance, and I'm able to conjure up in my mind a character that I can imagine as Willy Wonka, and it doesn't have the visage or the appearance of Gene Wilder. In fact, it has something completely different that I have imagined. So somewhere along the way in my own reading habits, I don't know when exactly it happened, but I was able to distinguish what I had seen prior in a film to what I was reading then on the printed page. And I was able to conjure up something independent from what I saw in any previous film iteration. So I was very fortunate to be able to do that. So now I'm able to, at least for the most part anyway, distinguish between the two. So that gives me more reason not necessarily to have to read the book first prior to watching the film. But then again, that's just my own approach. Maybe for other people it's different, and I can appreciate that very much. I know for some people reading the book first is of paramount importance, because that allows you to imagine the world and imagine the characters. And then you can watch the film, and then the film doesn't necessarily, it's not like it preoccupies your way of approaching the work of art. It's just another example of how that work of art can be expressed, but you still have your own vision that is intact in your mind. So I think I understand that approach, and I think that's very important. And if you are of that approach, then I really respect that, because that means that you have to develop something in your mind and then make sure it's so well developed that even a film adaptation that is different from the way you have developed it in your mind will not in any way hinder or otherwise injure what it is you've essentially developed in your mind, although you can have that alternative approach and still appreciate it for what it is. So I really admire that approach very much. So if you are one of those people who espouses that approach, bravo. well done, and please keep on doing what it is you're doing. Also, there's the issue, I think, of the dynamic between book and film. And I know it doesn't occur all the time, but sometimes it occurs where you have really different beasts. They're really operating in different levels of existence altogether. Naked Lunch is an example. The film Naked Lunch is, I think, nothing like the underlying work Naked Lunch. And so I think Naked Lunch, the film, it's more about someone trying to rationalize what the novel Naked Lunch was about. And I, for one, don't hate the film at all. I love the film, actually. I think it's a really fine piece of work. And it's just a different piece of work altogether from the novel, that's all. And so I think there's that aspect. So sometimes things operate completely on a different plane of existence from each other. And I find that to be really interesting. That's also true for certain adaptations that are accurate or that are faithful up to a certain level and then skew off into their own thing. And I know this is true for Game of Thrones. I haven't read anything except the first book. I know this is also true for Akira. I've mentioned this before. The graphic novel story of Akira is quite different from the film version because the film version was completed before the graphic novel serial was completed. And so there are different story threads and different new characters and all this. It just operates as a completely different organism altogether. And they're both equally fascinating. I think the same is true perhaps in some regard, more or less, with Harry Potter as well. Although I think there is a bit more of a cohesiveness, perhaps, although with some very significant variations along the way between the literature and the film works. But you know what I'm saying, I think, is that there is an interesting dynamic that occurs. And some people say, oh, the books were like this, but the films didn't do that, and so it's like that. But I think along the way you have to realize, at least I have to realize, that the films have to exist on their own. Case in point, Lord of the Rings. Right? Lord of the Rings, the film versions, took some pretty liberal choices when it came to changes from the novels. And so I thought that was very fascinating. And I would say for most of the changes, the treatment of Saruman as a character, for instance, especially towards the end of the film and the Shire, for instance, I thought that was actually handled a little bit better in the film versions, the extended versions anyway. That's my own personal opinion, but I know people feel differently. But I thought that was a little bit better, actually. Or at least let me put it this way. I thought it operated on a different plane of existence that made the films equally as entertaining as the books, let me put it that way. So this is all to say that I really don't have any hard line rule of reading the book first before watching the film. I am very appreciative of the fact that the film can operate on its own plane of existence. And if that's the case, then I think we can have a nice sort of debate within ourselves as to which is better, the book or the film. And so I think that's a fun thing to do with any work of art. And so to have the idea of the book coming before the film, I think automatically assumes some kind of superiority on the part of the book over the film. Now, I know that is usually the case with how things are developed, at least in today's times. I know that's usually the case, so I understand that's kind of the default because that's the results, that's the nature of the results that come about. But I'd like to think that that's not always the case. And so, therefore, I think that in order to give both book and film equal footing, at least at the start, and then they can kind of duke it out as the stories develop, if you know what I mean. But to give them, make sure they're on the same starting line, so to speak. I'd like to think that I don't necessarily have to read the book first before watching the film. In other words, it gives them basically equal footing at the start. And then I can read the book and then watch the film and then let that play itself out. And then from there, I can make up my mind as to which is quote-unquote superior, rather than think of it strictly in terms of primary work and derivative work or progeny or secondary work or something of that nature, which I think automatically it suggests something that is, for better or for worse, inferior. Okay, so that's kind of where I'm approaching it, but I don't know, maybe I'm thinking about it too much. Maybe I should be a bit more relaxed about it. I don't know, but is that okay? I hope that was answering your question. And so, I mean, don't get me wrong, of course, I do find that there are some works where the books are just impeccable, and no matter how good the films are, I think they are untouchable. That happens a lot, actually. And there are some that I think operate equally as well, and they're just so lovely in their own way. I think Howard's End, I've mentioned it recently, and so it's still fresh in my mind, but Howard's End is one that comes to mind almost immediately. The book is one of my favorite books ever. I've read it so often, I've lost count, but only connect, right? But the film version is astounding, and I've seen that film so many times too. I've lost count of how many times I've seen it. I listen to the soundtrack every time I go out for a walk in the morning. I have a little dog, and so I go out and walk my dog, and every time I walk my dog, I listen to the Howard's End soundtrack. The music that's played when Leonard Bast is walking from the station to Howard's End, that driving, or he's walking from his really drab apartment and he's walking towards Howard's End and to his fate. And so that lovely dun 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 dun, that's the one I listen to every time I walk my dog. So yes, so Howard's End stays with me even in musical terms. So what was I saying? Yeah, so Howard's End is an example for me that the book and the film work equally as well, and they work independent of each other, and they're doing slightly different things, but I appreciate what each is doing so very well, and so it's so moving. Let me end it there, and sorry about these dribbling responses to these questions. I really should try to improve the way and manner in which I answer. So please accept my deepest apologies. But I hope that is in some way an answer to your question. And so thank you very much. And I think this is directed in particular to my friends William and to Roman, who asked the question about books and the film adaptations. And so thank you very much. I know that there are other questions as well about the specific film books that I have and read, and maybe if you'll allow me to address that in a future video, I'll do so. But that's my take for now. And so let me end it there because it is rather late where I am, and I'd like to go to sleep and just wake up early in the morning and listen to the Howard's End soundtrack again. So with that out of the way, my friends, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great films. And until we meet again, my friends, cheers. And I should say that I was in a bit of a down mood because of a certain hectic nature of my schedule. And so in order to unwind, I did what I usually do when I unwind, is I put on the film Big Trouble in Little China. And this immediately put a smile on my face. And so let me just say, gosh, what should I say? We really shook the pillars of heaven, didn't we, Wang?